The night the music stopped. A single violin note rose above the low murmur of wealth and crystal, thin and pure against the roar of the storm outside. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, every sound inside the grand oceanfront country club died. Every champagne flute froze halfway to every painted lip. Every whispered deal, every practiced laugh, every clink of silver on porcelain simply stopped, as if the entire room had been unplugged. Because a 9-year-old boy in heavy carbon fiber leg braces had just wheeled himself into the center of the empty parquet floor and lifted one small, trembling hand toward the violinist on the raised platform. The director of the club started forward, face white with panic. Alexander Voss, seated at the head table in midnight blue evening wear that cost more than most people earned in a year, felt the words leave his mouth before he could stop them, low and sharp. "Ethan. Return to the table. Now." But the violinist, Sophia Reed, 29, pale skin luminous under the chandeliers, wheat blonde hair falling loose over a simple black gown that looked borrowed from another century, did not keep playing. She did not look to the director for permission. She did not glance at the 500 guests whose names filled society pages. She laid her violin gently on the chair, stepped down from the platform barefoot, and walked straight to the boy. She placed her hand in his. And she waited. Ethan's fingers shook. The braces locked his knees and ankles in rigid lines, yet he pushed up from the wheelchair with everything he had not used in 18 months. His arms trembled. His breath came in small, frightened gasps. Sophia never moved to help him stand. She simply held his hand and let him decide when the first step would come. It came. A dragging scrape of metal on wood. A second. A third. 3 painful, clumsy, perfect steps. The room did not breathe. The storm outside did not breathe. Alexander Voss, 42, tall, dark-haired, the man who had bought and sold companies before breakfast and had not cried since the night the ocean took his wife, felt something inside his chest crack wide open. When the third step ended, Sophia bent at the knee so she was eye level with Ethan. "Thank you for the dance," she said softly, as formally as if he were the only adult in the room. Then she released his hand, walked back to her violin, and lifted it as though nothing had happened. The spell shattered. Conversation rushed back in, louder, frantic, disbelieving. Phones rose like a wave. Alexander barely noticed. He was already on his feet, crossing the floor with the kind of purpose that made security step aside without thinking. Sophia was packing her violin when he reached her. Rain hammered the tall windows behind her, turning the glass into rivers. Lightning flashed, lighting the tears he refused to let fall. He took a card from his inside pocket, thick cream stock, simple black lettering, and pressed it into her hand. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rough. 9 o'clock. My house. She looked at the card, then at him, and for the first time he saw her eyes clearly, sea green, steady, unafraid. She slipped the card into her case without a word, closed the latches, and walked away through the side door into the storm. Alexander stood there long after she was gone, rain drumming like 1,000 accusations against the glass. 18 months earlier, that same ocean had swallowed the car carrying his wife while he watched from the cliff road, helpless. He had survived with scratches. Ethan had survived with shattered legs and a silence that grew heavier every day. Since then Alexander had built walls higher than the estate gates, private therapists flown in from Switzerland, experimental treatments money could buy, tutors who came to the house, schedules that left no room for the world to hurt them again. Tonight the world had walked straight through every wall, barefoot, carrying nothing but a violin and the courage to let a child lead. He looked back at the table. Ethan sat very still in the wheelchair, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with something Alexander had not seen since before the crash. Pride. Joy. Life. Alexander returned to his seat. The storm raged harder, as if the sky itself understood that something irreversible had just begun. He slipped the linen napkin from his lap, folded it once, and placed it on the table like a man laying down a weapon. For the first time in 18 months he did not know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, the violinist would come. And whatever happened after that, none of them would ever be the same again. The chandeliers flickered as lightning struck somewhere close. In that white flash Alexander saw his son's face clearly, no longer the fragile patient he had guarded like a secret, but a boy who had just remembered he still had a voice. The music had stopped. But something far more powerful had only just begun to play. Dawn crept over the Voss estate like a cautious intruder, pale light slipping between the heavy drapes Alexander had ordered drawn the night before. The storm had moved on, leaving only the low, restless growl of the ocean and the drip of water from the eaves. He had not slept. The linen napkin still lay folded on the dining table downstairs, a white flag he had not meant to raise. His reflection in the bedroom mirror looked unfamiliar, eyes bloodshot, jaw shadowed, the midnight blue jacket discarded across a chair like shed armor. He showered in water turned deliberately cold, hoping the shock would sharpen his thoughts. It only made the memory of those 3 steps colder. Ethan leading. Sophia following. The room holding its breath. By 7:30 he stood in the glass-walled music room that overlooked the cliff and the sea beyond. The space had been Elena's once, a grand piano no one played, shelves of sheet music gathering dust, a single violin stand empty since the funeral. Now it felt like a courtroom awaiting trial. He summoned the household staff with a single message. They filed in silently, the butler, the head of security, the estate manager, the nurse who had been on duty last night. Alexander did not sit. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man accustomed to giving orders and receiving answers. Her name, he said without turning. The violinist. Everything you have. The estate manager cleared his throat. Sophia Reed, sir. Independent contractor through the club's regular agency. Local address, no criminal record, references from 3 private events last year. She asked for cash payment, standard for musicians. Alexander turned then. Local address. Warehouse district, inland. Shared lease with a non-profit called Second Measure. Movement therapy for children. They're behind on rent. The nurse spoke up, voice hesitant. She was gentle with Master Ethan last night, sir. No overextension. Heart rate stayed steady. He slept without the usual night terrors. Alexander absorbed this without comment. He dismissed them all except the head of security. I want her here by 9. Tell her it's not a request. The man nodded and left. Alexander remained at the window, watching gulls wheel over the grey water. The estate sprawled beneath him, manicured lawns sloping to private beach, the infinity pool still covered for winter, the helipad empty. All of it designed to keep the world out. Last night the world had walked straight in on bare feet. At 8:57 a.m. the intercom buzzed. Security feed showed a modest grey sedan pulling through the gates, windshield wipers still flicking away leftover rain. Sophia Reed stepped out, coat buttoned to the throat, wheat blonde hair damp and loose, violin case in one hand. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at the house as if measuring it against something only she could see. The butler met her at the entrance. Alexander watched from the music room as she was led through corridors she had never seen, past portraits and sculptures that cost more than her annual income. She did not gawk. She walked with the same unhurried grace she had shown on the dance floor. When the door opened, she entered alone. The butler closed it behind her with a soft click. Alexander did not offer a seat. You disobeyed a direct order last night. Sophia set the violin case on the piano bench. I followed a better one. He studied her. No makeup. Coat still bearing faint rain spots. Boots practical, not fashionable. Nothing about her suggested she belonged in this room. Yet she stood in the center of it as if she had always been there. You have a proposal, he said. Make it. Sophia reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a single folded brochure. She placed it on the piano lid. Second measure. Child-led movement therapy. We let them choose direction, pace, and partner. No corrections. No goals except the ones they set. Alexander glanced at the brochure without touching it. I have the best pediatric neurologists on retainer. They've tried everything. They've tried fixing him, Sophia said quietly. We tried listening. The words landed like a slap. Alexander felt heat rise in his chest. You think 3 steps in a ballroom qualifies you to lecture me on my son's care? I think 3 steps qualify him to be heard. Silence stretched between them, taut as a violin string. Outside, a wave crashed against the cliff, spray rising high enough to speckle the glass. Alexander picked up the brochure. Glossy paper, simple design. A photograph of children in a converted warehouse, some in wheelchairs, some with crutches, all moving to music only they seem to hear. The tagline read, "Healing begins when they take the lead." He set it down. How much? Sophia's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Your price. Private sessions. Exclusive contract. Name it. She studied him for a long moment. You still don't understand. This isn't a service I sell. It's a program I run. For children who can't pay. Children whose parents have given up or can't afford hope. Alexander reached for his checkbook, pen already in hand. Everything has a price. Sophia stepped closer, close enough that he caught the faint scent of rain on wool. Not everything. Not this. He wrote a figure anyway. 7 digits. Tore the check free and held it out. 1 year. My estate. My son. Whatever you need. Sophia did not take it. I won't take your money to hide him away. Ethan doesn't need another expert telling him what he can't do. He needs a world that lets him try. Alexander's hand did not waver. Then take the money and build that world. But he stays here. She shook her head. He comes to us. Once a week. Open session. Other children. Real floors, not marble. Real music, not silence. The check trembled slightly between them. Alexander felt the ground shift again, the same crack that had opened last night widening into a chasm. He had built an empire on knowing when to push and when to walk away. This woman refused both. Sophia picked up her violin case. The brochure has the address. Tuesdays at 4. First session free. After that, whatever families can afford. Some pay nothing. Some pay forward. She moved toward the door. Alexander's voice stopped her. You knew who we were last night. Sophia paused, hand on the handle. I recognized the braces. Carbon fiber custom. Only one company makes them in that shade of blue. I read the invoice when the foundation rejected our equipment grant. The foundation. His foundation. Alexander felt the floor tilt. You submitted to us. Twice. She turned the handle. Both times denied without comment. The door opened. Rain had started again, soft and steady. Sophia stepped into the hallway, coat collar turned up. Ethan's invited any Tuesday he chooses. So are you. She was gone before he could form a reply. Alexander stood alone in the music room, the check still in his hand, the brochure on the piano lid. He crossed to the desk, opened the bottom drawer where old correspondence went to die. Files thick with rejection letters. He flipped through until he found it. Second measure, movement therapy pilot. Submitted, 18 months ago. Recommendation, decline. Insufficient data. Signature, A. Voss. A second file beneath it. Same program. Updated proposal. Submitted 6 months later. Same signature. Same outcome. He stared at his own handwriting until the letters blurred. The check in his other hand felt suddenly obscene. He tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces drift into the wastebasket like snow. Outside, Sophia's sedan disappeared down the long drive, taillights fading into the rain. Alexander watched until they were gone. Then he picked up the brochure and read every word. The estate felt different when he left the music room. Quieter, but not empty. The silence had weight now. Questions instead of answers. He found Ethan in the sunroom, nurse adjusting the braces for morning therapy. The boy looked up when Alexander entered, eyes bright with something new. "Will she come back?" Ethan asked. Alexander knelt, the brochure folded in his pocket. "She invited us to her place. Tuesdays." Ethan's face lit up. "Can we go?" Alexander smoothed his son's hair, the gesture awkward but genuine. "We'll see." The nurse raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night Alexander did not work. He sat in the darkened playroom, brochure open on his lap, Elena's journal beside it. Pages of sketches and dreams. The rhyme he had never noticed before. "Little feet will find their way." He read it aloud, voice rough. Ethan's door was open down the hall. A small sound drifted back, soft but unmistakable. "Duh." Alexander closed the journal. The estate breathed around him, no longer a fortress but a house waiting for footsteps. Tuesday loomed. 4 days away. He would drive himself. No driver. No security. Just a father and his son, going to see what happened when someone let a child lead. The brochure stayed on his nightstand. The torn check remained in the wastebasket, pieces curling like petals. Outside, the ocean kept its ancient rhythm. Inside, Alexander Voss began to count the days differently. Not in deals or deadlines. In steps. Tuesday arrived wrapped in low coastal fog that refused to burn off. Alexander drove himself inland in the plainest car the garage offered, a dark sedan that looked like every other on the highway. Ethan sat beside him, braces locked, seatbelt tight, eyes fixed on the windshield as though the world beyond the glass had become brand new. They had spoken little on the journey. Words felt too small for what was coming. 30 miles from the polished gates of the Voss estate, the landscape changed. Manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences. The GPS voice announced arrival at a sprawling brick warehouse that had once stored fishing nets. Faded letters above the loading dock read second measure in hand-painted blue. A single string of colored bulbs swayed in the damp wind, the only hint that anyone believed in miracles here. Alexander parked between a dented minivan and a bicycle with training wheels. He killed the engine and sat for a long moment, hands still on the wheel. Ethan reached over and touched his father's wrist, a small, certain pressure. "We're here, Dad." Alexander exhaled something that might have been surrender and climbed out. The air smelled of salt and wet concrete. He lifted the wheelchair from the trunk, unfolded it with the ease of long practice, and helped Ethan transfer. Together they rolled toward the open bay door where music spilled out, bright, uneven, alive. Inside was another country. Sunlight slanted through high broken windows, catching dust motes and turning them into slow-moving stars. 20 children moved across a floor painted with concentric circles of color, some on crutches, some in wheelchairs, some dragging legs that did not quite obey. A boy with forearm crutches spun in deliberate circles while a girl in a pink walker followed him, laughing so hard her braces rattled. No one corrected their posture. No one counted repetitions. A boom box in the corner played an old jazz standard, scratchy but warm. Sophia stood at the far end, violin tucked under her chin, hair tied back with what looked like a strip of medical tape. She wore gray leggings and an oversized sweater with the sleeves pushed up. When she saw them, she did not wave or smile. She simply lowered the bow and let the final note hang until it dissolved. 20 heads turned. A boy of 11 or 12 detached himself from the group and approached first. Tall, thin, spine curved from spina bifida, he moved with the rolling gait of someone who had long ago made peace with gravity. His smile was crooked and fearless. "I'm Leo," he announced to Ethan. "You're the kid from the video. Want to see my helicopter spin?" Ethan's answering grin was the first Alexander had seen in 18 months that reached his eyes. Sophia crossed the floor, violin now resting against her shoulder like a rifle at ease. "You came," she said to Alexander. Not a question. A fact she had decided to trust. Alexander nodded once. Words still felt clumsy. She turned to Ethan. "Shoes off if you want. The floor's warm. Circles are safe zones. Outside the circles you choose everything. Ready?" Ethan kicked off his sneakers before Alexander could protest. Sophia crouched, unfastened the braces with quick, practiced motions, and set them aside like relics that no longer ruled the room. Ethan's legs looked pale and thin beneath the denim, but he did not hesitate. Leo was already waiting by a bright red circle, arms open. Alexander stayed near the door, hands in his coat pockets, feeling every inch the intruder. A woman approached him, silver hair cropped short, posture straight despite the cane she leaned on. She wore a faded university sweatshirt and carried the quiet authority of someone who had once lectured to lecture halls full of skeptics. "Dr. Evelyn Hart," she said, offering a hand. "Retired Harvard neurology. Current volunteer dishwasher and grant writer. You must be the father." Alexander shook her hand. "Alexander Voss." "I know." Her eyes were kind but unflinching. "We've met on paper. Twice." He felt the heat rise in his neck, but she continued before he could speak. "Come. Walk with me. The children won't break if you breathe near them." She led him along the edge of the floor, cane tapping softly. "We have 22 enrolled. 14 more on the waiting list. Rent is due in 19 days. After that the bank takes the building. Insurance lapsed last month. But watch." She gestured toward the center. A girl no older than 7, cerebral palsy tightening one side of her body, stood inside a yellow circle holding a tambourine above her head. She shook it once, twice, then deliberately stepped outside the circle and walked 4 careful steps to hand it to Leo. Each step was crooked, triumphant. Leo shook the tambourine like a victory bell. The other children cheered. "No timers," Evelyn murmured. "No charts on the wall. The brain rewires fastest when the child decides the goal is worth the risk. Sophia's research, my data, their courage." Alexander watched Ethan roll to the edge of a blue circle. Leo offered a hand. Ethan took it and pulled himself up. For 8 full seconds he stood unsupported, knees trembling, face fierce with concentration. Then he sat back down, laughing, breathless, alive. Alexander's throat closed. Sophia ended the song. The children gathered in a loose circle on mats dragged to the center. She lifted her phone, thumbed to a video, and held it up. "I want to show you something," she told them. "A new friend danced with me last week. He took 3 steps. 3. He's here today." She pressed play. The screen showed shaky phone footage from the country club, chandeliers, gowns, the moment Ethan rose and Sophia stepped down. Gasps rose from the children. When the 3 steps ended, Leo hooped so loudly the sound bounced off the rafters. "Bring him every week." Maya shouted, the girl with the tambourine. "He can be my partner." Ethan's cheeks burned red, but he was smiling so wide Alexander barely recognized him. Sophia pocketed the phone. "We'll ask his dad." 20 pairs of eyes turned to Alexander. He felt pinned, exposed, utterly out of his depth. Evelyn leaned closer. "They don't need your money today, Mr. Voss. They need to know the world is bigger than hospital rooms and pity. 1 hour a week. That's all we're asking." Alexander found his voice. "He'll be here." A ripple of pure joy moved through the children. Someone started clapping. Others joined. The sound filled the warehouse like sunlight. Sophia gave him a small nod, nothing more. Across the room, hidden behind a stack of folded mats, a private investigator Alexander had hired at dawn adjusted the long lens of his camera. The feed streamed live to Alexander's phone, though he did not know it yet. Every laugh, every unsteady step, every child choosing their own music poured through fiber optic cable into a device resting silently in his coat pocket. He felt the shift before he understood it. Something inside him, calcified by grief and control, began to loosen. Evelyn tapped his arm. "Coffee's terrible, but the cookies are decent. Come." He followed her toward a folding table covered with mismatched mugs and a tray of chocolate chip cookies clearly baked by loving, imperfect hands. Children darted around them, some walking, some rolling, all moving with the unself-conscious grace of people who had been allowed to forget they were broken. Alexander took a cookie. It tasted like childhood and hope. On the mats, Ethan had claimed a corner with Leo and Maya. They were teaching him a game that involved passing a beanbag using only their feet. Ethan's laughter rang out, high and startled, as though he had forgotten he knew how. Sophia lifted her violin again, this time playing something slow and wandering. The children quieted, drawn back to their circles. The hour slipped past in color and motion and music that belonged entirely to them. When the final note faded, parents and caregivers began arriving in tired cars and borrowed vans. Alexander loaded the braces back onto Ethan's legs, the ritual suddenly feeling wrong, like putting armor on a bird that had just remembered sky. Ethan hugged Leo hard, promised Maya he would practice the foot game, then looked up at his father. "Can we come next week?" Alexander met Sophia's eyes across the warehouse. She was packing her violin, movements calm, waiting. "Yes," he said. "Every week." The private investigator in the shadows closed his camera case. The memory card held everything, the leaking roof, the peeling paint, the financial books lying open on a side table showing red numbers and 19 days. And 20 children who moved like they owned the future. Alexander did not yet know he had seen it all. But something inside him had already begun to move in a direction he could not control. As they rolled toward the car, Ethan waved until the warehouse disappeared behind them. Alexander glanced once in the rearview mirror. Sophia stood in the doorway, violin case at her side, watching them leave. The fog had lifted. The sky stretched wide and newly possible. Neither father nor son spoke on the drive home. Words were still too small. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy with what had been lost. It was light with what might still be found. The fog had vanished by the following Tuesday, replaced by a hard, bright winter sun that turned the ocean into hammered metal. Alexander drove the same dark sedan, no driver, no security, the private investigator dismissed with a single text the night before. He no longer needed borrowed eyes. He needed to see for himself. 18 months earlier he had not seen anything at all. He remembered the day with brutal clarity now, though at the time it had been only another gray morning in a chain of gray mornings. Elena's funeral had been 2 weeks past. The house still smelled of lilies decaying in crystal vases. Ethan lay upstairs under sedation, both femurs pinned, spinal cord bruised but mercifully intact. Doctors spoke in careful percentages. Alexander heard none of them. He had retreated to the study that overlooked the same cliff where the car had gone over. A tower of folders waited on the desk, grant proposals for the Voss Family Foundation, each flagged for approval or denial. His assistant had sorted them into 2 piles, safe bets and long shots. Second measure sat in the long shot pile, a thin manila folder with a child's hand-drawn treble clef on the cover. Alexander had been signing for 40 minutes without reading. His pen moved like a machine. Decline. 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 The Foundation's mandate was pediatric oncology and congenital heart defects, areas Elena had cared about. Everything else was noise. He reached the second measure proposal. The cover letter was handwritten on plain paper. Dear Mr. Voss, we believe children heal faster when they are allowed to lead the music instead of follow it. We have early data showing unprecedented neural recovery in non-ambulatory patients. All we need is 18 months of operating funds and a warehouse we can convert. With hope? Sophia Reed, MM, Neurologic Music Therapy. Dr. Evelyn Hart, MD, Professor Emerita, Harvard Medical School. He never turned past the first page. The word music registered as sentimental. Non-ambulatory sounded expensive with uncertain return. He scrawled a Voss across the rejection line, tossed the folder into the outgoing tray, and reached for the next. That was the second rejection. The first had come a year earlier, before the crash, when he had been merely busy instead of broken. Same signature. Same outcome. Now, 18 months later, he parked across the street from the warehouse and cut the engine. Children were already arriving, dropped off by parents who looked too tired to hope. He left Ethan in the car with the nurse he had finally agreed to hire part-time, promising he would only watch today, nothing more. He slipped through a side door marked deliveries and took position behind a stack of folded tumbling mats. The space smelled of wood polish and children and possibility. Sophia was tuning her violin, back to the door, hair twisted up with what looked like a paintbrush. She wore faded jeans and a sweater 2 sizes too big. She looked like someone who had stopped pretending the world was fair and had decided to build a fairer one instead. The session began without ceremony. Children claimed their circles. Music started, something slow and minor that felt like walking through water. Ethan rolled in with Leo pushing from behind, both of them laughing at a private joke. Sophia never once looked toward the shadows where Alexander stood. Yet everything she did seemed designed for the boy who had arrived unsure he belonged. She placed a single red ribbon on the floor 10 feet from Ethan's circle. "Anyone who wants may try for the ribbon," she called. "Only when you decide you're ready. No rush." Minutes passed. Children moved at their own speeds, some crawling, some hopping, some simply watching. Ethan stared at the ribbon the way sailors once stared at lighthouses. Leo nudged him. "Bet you can get it before I do." Ethan's competitive grin flashed, sudden and fierce. He locked his braces, gripped the wheels, and began to pull himself up using the arms of his chair. The nurse started forward instinctively. Sophia lifted one hand, gentle but firm. The nurse stopped. Ethan stood. 1 second. 2. His knees shook like leaves in wind. 3. 4. 5. Sophia began to play, soft, steady, a heartbeat under the melody. 6 seconds. 7. 8. On the 8th second Ethan's legs buckled. He sat hard, breath ragged, but his face blazed with triumph. Leo whooped and high-fived him so hard the sound cracked across the warehouse. Maya rolled over and draped the red ribbon around Ethan's neck like a medal. Sophia kept playing, eyes closed, as though she had known the exact second 8 would come. Alexander felt the wall inside him, the one he had built brick by brick out of grief and guilt and the terror of losing anything else, begin to crumble. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a few grains of mortar trickling down into dust. He watched the rest of the hour in silence. A girl with prosthetic legs chose to crawl because it was faster and laughed when Sophia crawled beside her. A boy who had never spoken above a whisper sang an entire verse of the song they were moving to, voice cracking but fearless. Every child set their own finish line, and every child crossed it. When the final note faded, parents drifted in to collect their children. Ethan rolled over to Sophia, ribbon still around his neck, and asked something Alexander could not hear. Sophia crouched, listened, then hugged him hard. Ethan's arms went around her without hesitation. Alexander slipped out the side door before anyone noticed him. He stood in the cold sunshine beside the car, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. The nurse lifted Ethan into the passenger seat. He stood 8 seconds, Mr. Voss. 8. "I saw," Alexander said, voice rough. Ethan twisted around. "Dad, did you see? I got the ribbon." Alexander reached in and touched the cheap satin, red against his son's coat. "I saw." Ethan's face fell slightly. "You didn't come in." Next time, Alexander promised, and meant it. They drove home in silence at first. Then Ethan began talking, words tumbling over each other, about Leo's helicopter spin, about Maya's tambourine, about how next week he was going to try for 12 seconds. Alexander listened and felt the crumbling inside him spread. That night he returned to the study where the rejections had been signed. The room felt colder than the ocean wind. He opened the bottom drawer again and pulled out both second measure folders. This time he read every page. Clinical trials. Brain scans showing new neural pathways forming in children who initiated movement rather than followed instruction. Testimonials from parents whose children had spoken for the first time, walked for the first time, laughed without fear for the first time. He read until the numbers blurred. Then he opened his laptop and searched the Foundation archives for every email, every memo, every note attached to those two denials. Nothing. Just his signature and the word decline. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark until the sky beyond the windows turned the color of Sophia's ribbon. The walls kept crumbling. He thought of Elena humming to Ethan in the months before the crash, how she had always let their son choose the ending of every bedtime story. How he had teased her for indulging him. How she had answered, "One day he'll need to know his choices matter more than our plans." He had not understood then. He was beginning to understand now. The next morning he cancelled 3 board meetings and drove back to the warehouse alone. He parked in the same spot, walked through the same side door, and took up position behind the mats again. This time he stayed for the entire session. Sophia still did not acknowledge him, but halfway through she placed a second red ribbon on the floor, 20 feet from Ethan's circle. Ethan saw it. His eyes widened. He looked toward the shadows where his father stood, though he could not possibly see him. Then he looked at Sophia. She gave the smallest nod. Ethan gripped his chair, pulled himself up, and began to count under his breath. 1, 2, 3. Alexander counted with him, silently, the wall inside him falling faster now, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but the raw, trembling space where something new might grow. 8 seconds came and went. Ethan did not fall this time. He took one careful, shaking step forward instead. Just one. But it was enough. The following Tuesday broke clear and cold, the kind of winter morning that made the warehouse roof creak and the painted circles on the floor glow like stained glass under the high windows. Alexander noticed the extra cars as soon as he turned onto the cracked service road. 2 television vans with satellite dishes, a cluster of sedans bearing press badges on the dashboards, a local news truck idling with its engine running. He felt the first twist of unease, but Ethan was already unbuckling, eyes bright with the ribbon from last week still tied around the handle of his backpack. "Dad, look." More people came to see Leo spin. Alexander forced a smile and parked. He had promised himself he would not control today. He had promised Ethan the same. Still, his pulse beat hard against his collar as they rolled toward the open bay door. Inside, the change was immediate. The usual mismatched folding chairs had been replaced by neat rows facing a small cleared area. A banner stretched across the far wall, "Second measure open house, see the children lead." Bright professional lights stood on tripods, cables snaking across the floor like black vines. Reporters milled with notepads and microphones. 2 camera operators adjusted lenses toward the circles. Sophia stood near the center, speaking quietly to a producer, violin case at her feet. She wore the same faded jeans and oversized sweater, but her hair was down and her expression calm, almost serene. When she saw them, she did not wave. She simply inclined her head once, the smallest acknowledgement, then returned to the conversation. Alexander's stomach dropped. He understood in that moment. She had chosen today. She had known Ethan was ready to try without braces. She had invited the world to watch. Ethan rolled forward eagerly, oblivious. Leo and Maya met him halfway, pulling him into their cluster of children who were already warming up. Alexander stayed by the door, hands clenched at his sides, feeling every camera lens swing toward him like searchlights. A reporter approached, young, eager, recorder already extended. "Mr. Voss?" "Channel 9. We were told the Voss family might be here today." Care to comment on your involvement with second measure? Another joined. Then a third. Phones rose. Live feeds began. Alexander felt the old armor try to lock into place, the reflex to shut down, to protect, to control the narrative. He opened his mouth to refuse, to demand they leave, to shield his son from spectacle. Then he looked across the warehouse. Ethan had rolled to the edge of the largest circle. Sophia knelt beside him, speaking softly. Ethan nodded, face serious. He reached down and unfastened the left brace himself, fingers steady now with practice. The heavy carbon fiber piece clattered to the floor. Children nearby gasped, then cheered. Leo pumped a fist. Maya covered her mouth with both hands. Sophia rose and stepped back 3 paces. She lifted her violin, but did not yet play. She simply waited. Every camera followed Ethan. Alexander stood frozen. The reporters pressed closer, questions overlapping. Is it true your foundation rejected this program twice? Will you be making a donation today? Mr. Voss, how does it feel to see your son walk? He could end it. One word and his security team, waiting discreetly 2 streets over, would clear the building in 90 seconds. The footage would show an angry billionaire shutting down a children's program. The narrative would be sealed, cold, controlling, cruel. Second measure would close in 19 days anyway, drowned in bad press and his own making. Or he could stay. Ethan placed both hands on the arms of his chair. He pushed up slowly, knees trembling, bare left foot flat on the painted floor for the first time in 18 months. The warehouse fell silent except for the soft click of camera shutters. Sophia began to play. A single sustained note, pure and steady, the kind of note that holds an entire sky. Ethan took one breath. Then another. And stepped. The first step was small, almost a shuffle, weight shifting to the leg that had known only braces for a year and a half. The second was stronger. The third carried him clear of the chair entirely. Reporters forgot to speak. Cameras zoomed. Someone sobbed quietly in the back row. 4th step. 5th. 6th. On the 6th step Ethan's legs gave out, but Sophia was already there, catching him gently, lowering him to the floor as the violin note rose into a triumphant major chord. The warehouse exploded. Children screamed with joy. Leo vaulted over mats on his crutches. Maya threw her arms around both of them. Parents wept openly. Ethan looked up, face flushed and shining, and searched the crowd until he found his father. He lifted one small hand in a wave that said everything words could not. Alexander felt the last brick of his wall turn to dust. The reporters surged forward, a wave of questions and flashing lights. Mr. Voss. Your reaction? Will the Voss Foundation be supporting second measure now? Is this the first time your son has walked unaided? Alexander stepped into the circle of cameras. The room quieted, waiting for the explosion, the denial, the retreat. He looked at Sophia first. She met his eyes over Ethan's head, violin still tucked under her chin, bow lowered. No triumph in her gaze. Only steady certainty. Then he looked at the nearest camera, red light blinking live. He cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rough but clear. My son just walked 6 steps because this program let him choose when he was ready. Not me. Not the best doctor's money can buy. Him. He paused, feeling the weight of millions watching. Second measure gave him back something I had taken away. His own pace. A reporter shouted, "Does that mean you'll fund them?" Alexander looked at the banner overhead, at the children now clustered around Ethan like a victorious team, at the peeling paint and leaking roof that had somehow become holy ground. He turned back to the camera. I rejected this program twice without reading a single page. That ends today. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Sophia's bow trembled, the only sign she had not expected this. Alexander continued, voice growing stronger. The Voss Foundation will cover all back rent, all overdue bills, and operating costs for the next 5 years. After that we will build a permanent facility designed by the children who use it. Miss Reed will have complete control. No interference. No branding. Her name on the building, not mine. The warehouse erupted again. Dr. Evelyn Hart pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming. Leo punched the air so hard he nearly fell over. A producer thrust a microphone toward Sophia. Miss Reed, your response? She lowered her violin slowly. Her gaze found Alexander across the chaos. Thank you, she said simply. But the children did the work. We just got out of their way. Alexander walked forward then, parting the cameras like water. He reached Ethan and Sophia and knelt, wrapping his arms around his son. Ethan buried his face in his father's shoulder, the red ribbon from last week still tangled in his hair. Reporters shouted final questions, but Alexander did not answer. He simply held his son while the world watched a billionaire surrender on live television, and felt lighter than he had since the night the ocean took everything else. Later, when the vans pulled away and the warehouse emptied until only the core group remained, Sophia found him stacking chairs with the parents. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Alexander set the last chair in place. Yes, I did. 6 steps, Sophia. 6. She studied him for a long moment. There will be more. He nodded, accepting it like grace. Outside, the winter sun hung low and golden over the warehouse roof. Inside, children practiced their new distances, measuring progress not in medical charts but in laughter and red ribbons. Alexander Voss, who had once believed money could buy anything except the past, discovered that some things could only be given away. And for the first time in 18 months, he was not afraid to let go. The warehouse had never been so quiet after being so loud. The last news van rolled away, tires crunching on gravel, satellite dish folding like a tired bird. The children were still buzzing, replaying Ethan's 6 steps for anyone who would listen, but the reporters were gone and the bright lights had been switched off. Only the late afternoon sun remained, pouring gold through the high broken windows and turning the painted circles into pools of fire. Alexander stood near the loading dock with Dr. Evelyn Hart, watching the final parents load wheelchairs and crutches into dented minivans. Ethan sat on a mat nearby, surrounded by Leo, Maya, and 4 other children, all of them arguing happily about whose turn it was to wear the red ribbon next. Sophia was packing her violin, movements slow and deliberate, as though the day had used every ounce of her strength and she was borrowing from tomorrow. Evelyn broke the silence first. You know they're already calling it the Miracle Warehouse online. 20 million live viewers and climbing. Your phones will start exploding in about 30 seconds. Alexander glanced at the device in his hand. The screen was dark. He had turned it off the moment the cameras left. He was not ready for the world's reaction. He was barely ready for his own. Sophia closed the violin case and walked over. She looked smaller without the instrument, younger, almost fragile. She stopped a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her. You didn't have to give us 5 years, she said quietly. 1 would have saved the building. Alexander met her eyes. 5 keeps the bank from ever knocking again. And 100 million keeps every child on the waiting list from ever hearing the word no. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had not expected the number. No one had. A low chime sounded from Evelyn's pocket. Then another. Then a cascade. Phones across the warehouse began to wake. Parents checked screens and gasped. Children crowded around, asking what hashtags meant. Within seconds the room filled with the soft glow of screens and the rising murmur of disbelief. Evelyn turned her phone so Alexander could see. A national network had already posted the raw footage, headline in bold white letters across a freeze frame of Ethan mid-step. Billionaire Voss pledges fortune after son walks unaided. Live, Alexander Voss announces immediate 8-figure gift to controversial child-led therapy program he once rejected. Below the video, the view counter spun like a taxi meter. Sophia took 1 step closer. Alexander. He heard the warning in her voice, the plea to prepare himself. He shook his head once. He was done preparing. He walked to the center of the largest painted circle, the one Ethan had crossed 6 times. The children quieted. Parents looked up. Someone had started a live stream again, a phone on a tripod in the corner blinked red. Alexander faced the camera, then turned away from it and looked only at Sophia. He lowered himself to one knee. The warehouse went absolutely still. Even the children understood something irrevocable was happening. Sophia's eyes widened. She took half a step forward, then stopped, hands pressed to her chest as if holding her heart in place. Alexander spoke to her, not to the camera, not to the 20 million watching. His voice carried in the sudden hush, low and rough and steady. Sophia Reed, I rejected your work twice. I never read past the first paragraph. I signed my name and moved on to the next folder because I was too busy, and then because I was too broken, to see what was right in front of me. He reached into his coat and drew out a single brass key on a simple red ribbon, the spare key to the warehouse that the landlord had handed over an hour ago when the back rent was paid in full. I was wrong. About everything. About control. About what healing looks like. About who gets to decide when a child is ready. He held the key up between them. Today I am transferring $100 million into an endowment that can never be touched by anyone but you. The new building, the research, the expansion to every city that needs it, all of it will be called the Reed Voss Global Institute of Child-Led Healing. Your name first. Your vision only. No board approval required. No donor plaques with my name. No interference. Ever. A soft sound escaped Sophia, half sob, half laugh. Alexander extended the key. You lead. I follow. Forever. He bowed his head and waited. The warehouse held its breath. Somewhere a child whispered, "Is he allowed to do that?" Sophia stepped forward. Her boots made no sound on the painted floor. She reached down and took the key, fingers brushing his. Then, gently, she placed her other hand on the top of his bowed head, the way a queen might knight a man who had finally remembered how to serve. I accept, she said, voice trembling but clear. For every child who has ever been told to wait until they're stronger. For every parent who was told to lower expectations. And for Ethan, who just taught us all how to walk again. She helped Alexander to his feet. The red ribbon now hung between them like a bridge. Behind them, the phone on the tripod kept recording. Within minutes the clip would be everywhere, the billionaire on one knee, the violinist accepting a kingdom on a red ribbon, 20 million people watching a man learn that the strongest position in the world is sometimes the lowest. The internet did not merely explode. It shattered. #You lead I follow trended worldwide within 7 minutes. Stock in Voss companies jumped 4% on the optics of humility alone. Late-night hosts wrote monologues before dinner. A senator tweeted a crying emoji and promised to introduce legislation named after the program. Inside the warehouse, none of that mattered yet. Ethan rolled forward and wrapped his arms around both their legs, the ribbon tangling around all 3 of them. Leo and Maya joined, then the rest of the children, until Sophia and Alexander stood at the center of a small, fierce, laughing storm of crutches and wheelchairs and hope. Evelyn Hart wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her university sweatshirt and muttered something about needing better grants now that they could actually afford them. Sophia looked at Alexander over the children's heads. Forever is a long time. He answered without hesitation. We have a lot of lost steps to make up for. She smiled then, the first full, unguarded smile he had ever seen from her, and it felt like sunrise after 18 months of night. Later, when the warehouse finally emptied and the last parent drove away waving through tears, Alexander carried Ethan to the car. Sophia walked beside them, key on its red ribbon now tied around her wrist like a promise. At the sedan she paused. There will be interviews tomorrow. Lawyers. Contracts. I know, he said. They'll want you to smile for cameras. I'll smile when Ethan takes 7 steps. She laughed softly. 7 might take another week. Then I'll wait. He opened the passenger door. Ethan reached for Sophia's hand one last time. See you tomorrow, Miss Sophia? Every tomorrow, she promised. Alexander closed the door and turned to her. The winter dusk had settled, stars pricking the sky above the warehouse roof. Somewhere inside, the painted circles waited for morning footsteps. Thank you, he said. The words felt too small, but they were all he had. Sophia touched the key on her wrist. You gave us tomorrow. We'll earn the day after that together. She walked back toward the warehouse, silhouette framed by the open door and the soft glow from within. Alexander watched until she disappeared inside. He got behind the wheel and started the engine. Ethan was already half asleep, red ribbon clutched in one fist, dreaming of distances still to come. As they pulled away, Alexander glanced once in the rearview mirror. The warehouse lights stayed on, a single bright island in the dark. 20 million people had watched a man kneel. But only one woman had watched him stand back up changed. And somewhere in the space between those two moments, a father, a son, and a violinist had begun writing a new kind of music. One step at a time. 6 months later the old warehouse was gone. In its place rose steel bones wrapped in glass and light, a building that looked as though someone had asked children to draw their dreams and then hired the best architects alive to make the drawing real. Sloped floors curved like waves. Walls of movable mirrors caught sunlight and threw it in rainbows across hallways wide enough for 2 wheelchairs to race. Every door frame was rounded, every threshold flush with the floor, every corner painted a different color so no child ever felt lost. Alexander stood on the construction site every week, hard hat tilted back, boots crusted with coastal mud. He had sold 2 companies outright, an AI logistics firm and a chain of private airports, to free capital and, more importantly, time. Board members called it reckless. Analysts called it sentimental. He called it Tuesday. Sophia designed everything with the children. They met in the half-built atrium, a circle of folding chairs surrounded by scaffolding and the smell of fresh concrete. Leo wanted a floor that slanted so he could roll downhill and build speed for his helicopter spin. Maya demanded mirrors that lowered so she could see her feet even when seated. Ethan, now walking with only a light ankle brace on bad days, asked for a music room with windows that opened to the ocean breeze because Miss Sophia says music needs to breathe. Sophia wrote every request on a giant whiteboard labeled "This is OURS." Architects hovered, nervous about load-bearing walls and budget overruns. Alexander stood at the edge of the circle, arms folded, and said nothing unless asked. When asked, he answered with one word, yes. Contractors learned quickly. If the children wanted it, it happened. One afternoon a structural engineer tried to explain why a fully sloped dance floor would violate code. Leo, now 12 and fearless, rolled to the front and demonstrated his spin on the temporary plywood. The engineer watched the boy's face, pure joy, no fear of falling, and closed his notebook. 2 weeks later the city granted a variance labeled therapeutic exemption. Rumor said the mayor's own niece was on the waiting list. Ethan became the unofficial big brother of the first resident cohort. 10 children moved into the completed East Wing in April, the first to live full-time at what was now officially the Voss Global Institute of Child-Led Healing. Ethan spent every weekend there, teaching the younger ones how to tie the red ribbon around their wrists when they earned a new distance. He still fell sometimes, especially when storms rolled in and his left leg remembered old pain, but he fell laughing now, because someone was always there to catch him. Alexander attended every planning meeting, every site walk, every child-led design session. He sat on the floor when chairs ran out. He held beams steady while welders worked overhead. He learned the difference between a gait trainer and a dynamic stander and how to tighten a thoracic strap without pinching skin. He never once suggested a change. Sophia noticed. Late nights found them on the half-finished rooftop, the skeleton of the building glowing below under temporary floodlights. The ocean breathed in the distance, steady and ancient. They brought coffee in paper cups and sat on the edge where the final glass wall would one day rise. One night in May, the sky was thick with stars and the air smelled of sawdust and salt. Sophia leaned back against a stack of skylight frames, boots dangling over the edge. "You sold the airports," she said. Alexander nodded. "Never liked flying commercial anyway." She laughed softly. "You gave up private jets for sloped floors." "I gave up a lot of things that stopped mattering the day Ethan took 6 steps toward you." Silence settled, comfortable now. 6 months of shared work had worn away the sharp edges between them. Sophia spoke first. "I still have his violin." Alexander looked at her. "Whose?" "My husband's. Daniel. He was first chair with the symphony. Played the night we met. Cancer took him 4 years ago. I kept the violin in its case under the bed because opening it hurt too much. Then one day I opened it for the kids. Turns out music doesn't die when the player does. It just waits for new hands." Alexander stared at the dark water beyond the site. "Elena used to dance with Ethan in the kitchen. Bare feet, terrible pop songs, flour on the floor from whatever she was baking. I'd come home late and stand in the doorway pretending to be annoyed. She'd grab my hand and make me dance too. I was always offbeat. She never cared." He paused, voice rough. "I haven't danced since the funeral." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand, the same way she had taken Ethan's that first night at the country club. Her palm was calloused from violin strings and lifting children. "Dance with me now," she said. There was no music except the wind and the distant rhythm of waves. Alexander stood, awkward in work boots and sawdust, and let her lead. She placed his hand at her waist, took the other in hers, and began to move. Slow, simple circles on the unfinished concrete. He was offbeat, as always. She never corrected him. After a while she rested her head against his shoulder. "They're going to be okay, Alexander. All of them." He closed his eyes. "Because of you. Because we stopped trying to fix them and started following." They stayed like that until the floodlights clicked off one by one, leaving only starlight and the faint glow from the city miles away. Another night, weeks later, rain drummed on the temporary roof tarp. They sat beneath it sharing a thermos of terrible construction site coffee. "I used to think control was love," Alexander said suddenly. "Schedules. Specialists. Private planes to the best clinics. I thought if I managed every variable, nothing else could be taken from us." Sophia listened without judgment. "I was wrong," he continued. "Love looks more like painted circles on a warehouse floor and a woman brave enough to let a child fall." She reached over and brushed sawdust from his sleeve, the gesture gentle, familiar now. "Love also looks like a man who sells airports so kids can have sloped floors." He caught her hand before she could pull it away. Held it. The rain drummed harder. "Sophia." She waited. "I don't know what this is," he said. "Between us. I only know I stopped wanting to control it the day you took Ethan's hand instead of mine." She turned to face him fully, rain dripping from the tarp edge between them like a curtain. "I stopped wanting to control it the night you knelt," she whispered. Neither moved to close the distance. Not yet. Some things, they had learned, were best approached at the child's pace. Below them, the building grew. Music rooms took shape with acoustics designed by a 10-year-old who heard pitches in color. Therapy pools curved like nautilus shells because a girl with spina bifida dreamed of swimming without walls. A rooftop garden sprouted where children would one day plant vegetables they could reach from wheelchairs or standing frames. Every detail bore the mark of hands that had been asked, for once, what they wanted the world to feel like. Ethan's room in the resident wing had a window shaped like a treble clef. He hung the original red ribbon above his bed like a banner. One evening in early autumn, Alexander found him there teaching a new resident, a 6-year-old who had never taken a single step, how to tie the ribbon around her own wrist. "When you earn your first distance," Ethan explained solemnly, "you tie it yourself. That's the rule." The little girl nodded, eyes huge. Alexander leaned in the doorway and felt his heart crack open in an entirely new way. Later, on the rooftop again, the glass wall finally installed and reflecting a sunset the color of Sophia's violin, she asked the question they had both been carrying. What happens when it's finished? Alexander looked out at the ocean, steady and endless. Then we start the next one. And the next. Until every child who needs a place to lead has one. She slipped her hand into his. This time he did not let go. Below them, the Reed Voss Institute rose complete and gleaming, a building that had learned, like its builders, to follow where children pointed. And on the half-finished rooftop, under a sky turning slowly to night, two people who had lost everything discovered the quiet, terrifying, beautiful truth. Some dances begin long after the music starts. Some loves are built one surrendered step at a time. The morning of the opening ceremony arrived like a held breath finally released. Coastal mist drifted in from the ocean and curled around the new building, softening the edges of glass and steel until the entire institute looked as though it had grown out of the cliff itself. Cars lined the winding drive for half a mile, some sleek, some dented, some bearing diplomatic plates and others bearing stickers of stick-figure families. 200 children had come from waiting lists that stretched across continents, some carried in arms, some rolling themselves, all of them wearing red ribbons tied around wrists or chair handles or canes. Alexander stood at the back of the crowd, coat unbuttoned, hands in pockets, anonymous among parents and therapists and journalists who no longer swarmed him. He had learned the shape of invisibility and found it suited him better than spotlights ever had. At the foot of the wide, sloping steps, a ribbon of crimson silk stretched between two temporary posts. Behind it, the main doors stood open, revealing the atrium where sunlight poured through skylights and danced across floors painted in gentle waves of color. Every detail the children had asked for 6 months ago now breathed and gleamed. Sophia waited on the top step, simple white dress fluttering in the breeze, violin resting against her shoulder like an old friend. She had refused a podium. She had refused a script. She had only agreed to play one piece before the ribbon was cut. The crowd quieted without being asked. She lifted the bow and began. It was the same slow waltz from the country club that stormy night 2 years earlier, but transformed, richer, slower, threaded through with new melodies the children themselves had hummed into existence during late-night sessions. The notes rose and fell with the breathing of the ocean. Children swayed where they stood or sat. Parents reached for each other's hands. When the final note drifted away on the wind, no one moved for several heartbeats. Then Leo rolled forward, 12 years old and fearless, wearing a suit jacket 2 sizes too big because it had belonged to his older brother. Maya walked beside him, no walker today, only forearm crutches painted bright turquoise. Ethan followed, steady on his own feet, light carbon fiber brace visible only when the breeze lifted the hem of his trousers. He carried oversized golden scissors tied with yet another red ribbon. The three of them stopped in front of the crimson silk. Sophia came down the steps to meet them. She did not speak. She simply knelt so they were eye level and placed her hands over theirs on the scissors. Together they cut. The ribbon fell in 2 perfect pieces, curling onto the ground like spilled paint. The doors opened wide. Children surged forward in a joyful, chaotic tide, laughter, wheelchair wheels on new tile, crutches tapping, sneakers squeaking, parents laughing through tears. Music spilled from hidden speakers, something bright and impossible to stand still for. Alexander stayed where he was, content to watch the current carry everyone else inside. He had learned the sweetness of the back row. Sophia found him there 10 minutes later, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. "They want Ethan to say something," she said. The kids voted. No adults allowed to refuse a kid vote. Alexander's heart gave an odd lurch. "He's ready." She led him through the atrium where children already explored, sliding down the gentle slopes, spinning in front of movable mirrors that reflected them from every angle, discovering cubbies filled with instruments they were allowed to play as loudly as they wished. A small stage had been set up in the main hall beneath a skylight shaped like an open hand. Microphones waited. 200 children settled in a loose semicircle, some on mats, some in chairs, some standing for the first time in their lives. Reporters lined the back walls, unusually quiet. Ethan climbed the 3 steps without help. He wore the same red ribbon from the warehouse days, now faded and frayed, tied around his wrist like a veteran's medal. He did not look nervous. He looked like a boy who had walked across fire and discovered the other side was solid ground. He leaned toward the microphone. "Hi," he began, voice clear, a little too loud, then adjusting. "My name is Ethan. 2 years ago I couldn't stand up. Doctors said maybe someday. Grown-ups said be careful. Be patient. Wait." He paused and scanned the sea of faces, many of them reflecting his own journey back at him. "Then Miss Sophia let me choose when I was ready. She didn't push. She didn't pull. She just waited with music until I decided the next step was mine to take." A ripple of soft laughter and nods. "Some of you just got here today. Some of you are scared. Some of you think walking or talking or dancing is for other people. I thought that too." He lifted his wrist with the frayed ribbon. "This is from my first 8 seconds standing up. I still have it because Miss Sophia taught me the bravest thing isn't being strong. It's choosing your own music even when your legs shake. Even when you might fall. Especially when you might fall." He looked straight at Sophia, who stood to the side, eyes bright with unshed tears. "So pick your music. Loud music, quiet music, fast or slow. Doesn't matter. Just make sure it's yours. The grown-ups here?" He gestured vaguely toward the back of the room where Alexander stood. "They finally learned to follow. Turns out they're pretty good at it when we show them how." Laughter rolled through the hall, warm and delighted. Ethan grinned. "That's all. Now let's go find the music room with the ocean windows, because Leo says the echo in there is epic." He stepped back from the microphone to wild applause, whistles, and the unmistakable sound of 200 children ready to claim their own tempo. Sophia met him at the bottom of the steps and hugged him so hard his feet left the ground for a second. Cameras flashed, but neither of them noticed. Alexander felt the tears come without warning, hot and sudden, sliding down his cheeks in full view of strangers. He made no move to hide them. A mother beside him handed him a tissue without looking. He took it with a murmured thank you. Another father clapped him gently on the shoulder. No one stared. Everyone understood. Later, when the crowd had scattered into exploratory chaos and the building itself seemed to sing with new footsteps, Alexander found Sophia on the rooftop garden. Children's laughter drifted up from open windows below. The ocean lay calm and glittering under midday sun. She stood at the railing, red ribbon from the ceremonial cutting now tied around her own wrist. Alexander joined her. For a long moment they simply breathed the salt air and listened to the sound of children choosing their own music. "Your son just gave the best speech I've ever heard," she said softly. "Our son," Alexander corrected, the words slipping out before he could measure them. Sophia turned, eyes searching his face. He met her gaze without flinching. "I stopped correcting pronouns a long time ago," he said. "He's yours as much as mine. Maybe more." She smiled, small and wondering, and leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, careful, still learning the shape of permission. Below them, Ethan's voice rose clear from an open window, teaching someone the foot game he had invented with Maya. Laughter followed, bright as bells. Alexander felt the tears threaten again, but this time they were the easy kind. Sophia spoke into the quiet. Hospitals in 12 countries adopted the protocol this morning. Official letters came while Ethan was speaking. They're calling it the Voss model now. He pressed a kiss to her temple, the first one he had dared without asking. They can call it whatever they want. The children will still call it choosing their own music. She turned in his arms, hands rising to rest against his chest. "And what do you call it?" she asked. He looked down at her, at the building humming with life below, at the ocean that had taken so much and finally given something back. "Redemption," he said simply. Then, because some moments arrive fully formed and need no more words, he lowered his head and kissed her properly for the first time. Soft, slow, certain. She kissed him back with the same steadiness she had once offered a trembling 9-year-old boy on a storm-lashed dance floor. Below them, 200 children discovered distances they had never been allowed to dream of. Above them, the sky held its breath and then let go in perfect, endless blue. And in the space between, a father who had learned to stand in the back row cried openly while the bravest thing in the world happened all around him. Children choosing their own music, and the grown-ups finally wise enough to follow. 1 year later the institute had grown roots deep into the cliff and wings wide enough to catch every sunrise. Children came and went like tides, some for a week, some for months, some only long enough to learn they could choose their own tempo and then carry it home. The building no longer looked new, it looked lived in, loved in, danced in. Red ribbons hung from every doorway, faded and retied 100 times, each one a quiet testament. On a soft October evening the sky spread clear and dark, pricked with early stars. String lights, the kind children had strung themselves last winter solstice, glowed gold across the rooftop garden, looping between lemon trees and pots and benches built low enough for wheelchairs or tired legs. The ocean breathed below, steady and ancient, the same ocean that had once taken everything and now only gave back moonlight. Most of the residents were asleep. A few night owls read in the library or practiced quiet spins in the moonlit atrium. The building hummed with the low, contented sound of a place that had learned how to rest. Alexander found them on the rooftop first by following the faint sound of a violin. Sophia stood near the railing in a simple sweater the color of sea fog, playing something slow and wandering that seemed to rise straight out of the water. Ethan waited a few feet away, no braces tonight, only sneakers and the loose confidence of a boy who had run the length of the beach that afternoon and collapsed laughing into the sand. When the phrase ended, Ethan stepped forward. "One more dance?" he asked. His voice had begun to deepen, the question came out half child, half young man. "No cameras. No falling. Just us." Sophia lowered the violin and smiled the way she rarely did in front of crowds, quiet, private, meant only for the people she had chosen to let inside her walls. "Always," she said. She lifted the instrument again and began the same waltz that had started everything 2 years earlier in a storm-lashed country club. The melody floated out across the rooftop, unchanged and yet utterly transformed, because now it carried every step taken since. Ethan offered his hand. Sophia set the violin briefly on a bench, stepped into his arms, and let him lead. He did. No hesitation. No tremor. He moved with the easy grace of a boy who had learned his body was no longer an enemy but a partner that finally trusted him to choose the rhythm. They traced slow circles under the string lights, his hand steady at her waist, her steps matching his perfectly because he had set the tempo and she had promised long ago to follow. Alexander watched from the shadowed doorway, heart too full for sound. He had not planned to interrupt. He had only come searching for them the way he sometimes did on quiet nights, needing to see with his own eyes that the world had not taken them back. But the sight of his son leading the woman who had given him every step he now owned undid something gentle and irreversible inside Alexander's chest. He stepped into the light. Ethan saw him first and smiled without breaking rhythm. Sophia followed his gaze, met Alexander's eyes, and understood instantly. She slowed, let the dance settle into a gentle sway, then quietly withdrew her hand from Ethan's shoulder and placed the bow against her heart in a small, wordless bow. She stepped aside. Alexander walked forward, boots silent on the warm wood decking. Ethan turned and offered his hand the same way he had once offered it to Sophia across a parquet floor in a different lifetime. Alexander took it. Father and son stood face to face under the strings of light, the violin resting on the bench, the ocean holding its breath. Ethan began to move. It was clumsy at first. Alexander still had 2 left feet and a lifetime of believing dancing was something other people did. But Ethan was patient the way only children who have relearned gravity can be. He guided with the sureness of someone who had walked through fire and discovered the flames were only paper. Alexander followed, letting his son set the height of the step, the speed of the turn, the moment to simply sway. They moved in slow circles that grew steadier with every measure of remembered music only they could hear. Sophia watched from the railing, arms wrapped around herself, eyes shining with tears she made no effort to hide. Alexander felt the years fall away. The crash. The silence. The walls he had built out of money and fear. All of it dissolved in the simple pressure of his son's hand in his and the quiet knowledge that Ethan was no longer reaching up, he was reaching across, equal to equal. When the invisible melody ended, neither of them stopped moving entirely. They simply slowed into stillness, foreheads resting together, breathing the same salt air. Alexander's voice came out rough and wondering, meant only for the two people on the rooftop with him. "Thank you for giving me back my son," he whispered to Sophia across the small space between them. Then, softer still, to Ethan, "And thank you for teaching me how to be his father again." Ethan's arms came around his neck, strong now, certain. Alexander held him back just as tightly, no longer afraid of breaking or being broken. Sophia stepped forward and completed the circle, slipping her arms around both of them from behind. The three of them stood wrapped together under the string lights and the low October moon, swaying though the music had ended, because some songs live longer than sound. Below them the institute slept, full of children who would wake tomorrow and choose their own distances again. Above them the stars kept their ancient watch. And on a quiet rooftop, where a storm had once begun everything by ending everything else, a family, scarred, remade, and finally whole, danced without music, without braces, without fear. The violin rested on the bench, bowed beside it, silent and content. The music was inside them now. It always would be.